Welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Neshoba Regional School Committee on November 26, 2019 at 4 o'clock. We have would we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So our business this evening for this meeting is for the Personnel Subcommittee to make a recommendation regarding legal counsel for an investigation. The investigation is into the discrepancy between information that was in the police report and information that came out of the school district's internal investigation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Elaine.
Great, thank you. I think at this point I've realized that to start every presentation for the school committee means thank you for the opportunity to present today. So myself and Elaine Sanfilippo, thank you for correcting, make up the personnel subcommittee, and we wanted to share with you today about the process that we went through in order to make the recommendation of the third-party attorney. And I'll just start off with giving just an objective. This is sort of where I'm at, where we're at with this, and I would also invite Elaine to chime in at any point if she has anything to add. I'm sure she has tons to add, and I should also take that opportunity to thank her for all of her help in making this process pretty straightforward. So our objective for those of us at home that maybe can't read it is to share the process followed by the Neshoba Regional School District Personnel Subcommittee, which ultimately led to a recommendation of an independent third-party attorney to lead our internal investigation. This was the same recommendation that was made on the last school committee meeting, which was November 20th, Wednesday of last week. So in your packets, you will see a copy of this summary sheet. And this is the sheet that Elaine and I kind of worked with and filled out as we move forward. And I'm going to return back to this. But basically, on the left-hand side, this is one of those things where my pointer doesn't work, but on the left-hand side, we've got a list of all of the attorneys and firms that were recommended. And then as we kind of got in touch with each one of them, we either did not hear from them and they sort of, I guess, eliminated themselves from the list of possibilities, or we had a relatively fruitful conversation and an initial phone consultation. For those that, even after the initial phone conversation that were, that I guess we'll call self-vetted, they either withdrew themselves from consideration or had some sort of conflict of interest. And so ultimately, of the original 12, we ended up with 3. Those were interviewed on November 18th and November 19th. And just to be clear, the charge was given to us on the meeting from the 13th. Yep. We started this on the 14th, worked through the weekend, finished the final interviews by Tuesday, and we're ready for the recommendation a week later. So we'll return back to this, but the first question that I wanted to answer was, from where did we receive our initial attorney recommendations? Starting on that 14th, it was recommended to us by the school committee chair to get in touch with Dorothy Presser, who is the field director from MASC. And so Dorothy is a trusted source, and she gave us multiple different options. I also got in touch with my personal town administrator from the town of Bolton, Don Lowe, also another trusted source, and he handed us I think 4 or 5 different options, and there was even a citizen who was familiar with the field that solicited their input, also coincidentally from the town of Bolton. And then through each of these 3, we were also given what I'll call third-party recommendations, sort of recommendations through the people that were recommended to us. So we got recommendations from a variety of sources. we had that really big list in the beginning. How did we narrow the broad list of candidates from that big list? We were given phone calls for each of the attorneys. Both Elaine and I made those initial phone calls, some of whom we spoke with directly, some of whom we had to leave messages. So there were a few reasons why they were initially removed from consideration. Some simply didn't return the phone call, and that's fine. That made our job a little bit easier. Some, after somewhat lengthy discussions in some cases, removed themselves. Would recuse be the right word in this case? Recuse themselves or remove themselves? Either or. Recuse themselves because of conflicts of interest. We had a couple of really reputable attorneys who it felt from our judgment had either insufficient experience in this type of case or it was simply not the right fit. And there was one that recused himself several days in, even after setting up a time to do a final interview because of time limitations. He was a part-time superintendent and a lawyer at the same time and felt like he couldn't commit all of the resources that were necessary. The final interview questions that you will see in your packet, you'll see a packet with a header that says PSC Attorney Recommendation, November 26th, 2019. Those were the final questions. There were a total of, I believe, 8 questions. Yeah, 8 questions, 2 of which were very quick. I also included a sheet at the top where it says Attorney Recommendation. I'm sorry. It says initial raw questions, and I wanted to share that with you because I came up with a list of questions that I thought were pertinent. I sent those over to Elaine. Elaine sent those back. We in turn sent those over to our chair, Kathy Codian, and Dorothy Presser at MASC, and then their comments and their suggestions and modification were duly taken into consideration so that we ended with the 8 finalized questions that you see on the recommendation sheet of the final interviews from all 3 attorneys. So if we kind of go back, you'll see each attorney and their firm, who recommended them. Again, I blotted out, and on your sheet I X'd out, but I blotted out the name just in the interest of confidentiality, Dorothy Presser and Don Lowe. The results from the initial outreach, whether we spoke to them or they simply didn't answer the phone call, and then maybe after that conversation, if they withdrew themselves or if they made it to the final round. And as I said, the final round consisted of 3 in our opinion, very reputable attorneys. And as Elaine said several times, we had the luxury of choice in choosing between those 3. The final interview format, we decided that we gave them the option of taking one of 3 20 to 30 minute slots to answer those questions. In the end, there were really only 6 questions that allowed them to elaborate. The 2 final questions were just, can you provide us with references and what's your hourly rate? So we really didn't consider that. So there were really only enough time for about 6 questions. And again, those were done on Monday of Tuesday of last week. Each candidate received the exact same 8 questions. I led with the questions. Elaine took notes on the responses, and both of us kind of facilitated when necessary. And I'd also like to point out that we very intentionally revised the questions that we asked in a format that left things very open-ended and allowed them to elaborate in a way that they deemed fit. We didn't want to drive the conversation. We wanted them to drive the conversation in whatever way they thought was appropriate. And so after each interview, offline, the Personnel Subcommittee discussed the responses immediately, what our impressions were from each of the final interview candidates. Again, we left our questions very open-ended, and these are the list of questions. Again, you will see those in the notes taken from the interviews. But the questions that we narrowed down after consulting with one another and with the chair and with Dorothy: what is your background in investigating potential mishandling of reported abuse? Can you provide a general timeline of how an investigation of this nature would proceed? And different attorneys actually interpreted timeline in different ways. What kind of resources would you need from us in order to be able to develop a comprehensive report? a discussion of the limitations that they saw, a potential limitation that they saw in this type of investigation. Of course, ensuring neutrality, objectivity, and thoroughness. And then at the end of the investigation, providing some sort of guidance and recommendations to the school committee moving forward from the investigation.
Okay.
All right. Again, questions about references and then rate. So the final recommendation was made based on how comfortable they were in responding to some of these fundamental questions. We evaluated kind of qualitatively the depth and the quality of their answers. Of course, their experience in similar cases, school-related cases, was of course a paramount concern. The degree of insight and elaboration outside of the scope of the questions, so in other words, where did they go with those questions once we sort of laid the foundation? And then honestly, one of our deciding factors was their ability to communicate in a way that was clear and that was lucid, and so communication actually was sort of one of the reasons that we made the choice that we made. So we did choose Tim Norris of Norris, Murray, and Pelican. Just a few bullet points. Tim has a 30-year experience in third-party investigations, has litigated multiple sexual abuse cases and issues surrounding teacher-student behavior. Knowing that that's really not the scope of our interview, they're of course tangentially related, and he has investigated past employee misconduct representing schools, but again, there were times in our conversation with Mr. Norris that it felt like he was speaking directly to our case. And so we felt very comfortable with our decision, even though it was really a choice between three highly qualified candidates. And so I guess that's it. The next steps are following up with references, which Kathy has done, developing the scope of the investigation, which has already, I guess, begun in the exchange with Attorney Norris, and then, of course, establishing a start date.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So with regard to the references, everyone picked up the phone when I called, which was nice. So the first person I talked to was Heather Schroka. She is the chair of the Lunenburg School Committee. I guess they had a superintendent that embezzled some money and ended up in jail, I guess. And then there was a racist incident. A woman painted racist things on her house and tried to blame the African-American kids on the football team. You might remember that from the news. She has experience with him. He was the attorney that helped the school district with that. He knows his stuff. He's good with people, very responsive in terms of follow-up and clarity and helping the school committee communicate with the public. So she was very high on him. Virginia Sims George, she is the chair of the Assabet Valley Regional Vocational School District. She says he's very effective, thorough, he deals with the public well, helped them resolve a number of issues, and does a good job explaining issues and relating them to the affiliated legal issues. He's easy to work with and knowledgeable. I spoke with James O'Brien, who is the superintendent of Greater New Bedford Regional Vocational School. Just as an aside, he went to school there as a student, and now he's a superintendent. I mean, it's like 100 years later, but that used to happen a lot. That I know there was a very well-known superintendent of Arlington, but it was interesting talking with him. He's very colorful. He says, I asked about Tim, he said, shut the door and sign on the dotted line. You can't do better. They had a situation, I guess, in that school district related to racist remarks and graffiti and whatnot, and he actually helped them with an affiliation with Brown University to do some professional development around raising, awareness and sensitivity and whatnot, but very high on, good with the public. And then I talked to Ernie Houle, who's the Assabet Valley Regional Technical High School person. He says he's excitable. he's not excitable, he's methodical. And he doesn't get excited. He's a former Marine. They haven't had to do a third-party investigation, but he's successfully guided the school committee. He's got good suggestions, good presentation skills, takes good notes. He's very thorough, and he's mindful of potential liability. So they were all very favorable towards him. And so that is the part of the process that completes the recommendation. Does anybody have any questions or anything for me, Mike, or Elaine? Yes, Leah.
What is his availability? Did he say he would be able to start immediately?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, I'm going to call, let's vote and then we'll talk about next steps.
Okay.
But
So he wouldn't put us off for a ton of time?
No. Isn't that the impression you got?
Yeah, in fact, there were one or two attorneys that said they weren't available until a certain date, and that kind of pushed us away a little bit. But yeah, he was available immediately.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion to hire attorney Tim Norris?
Move the recommendation of the Personnel Subcommittee.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Good. Thank you so much. Good job, you guys. Very thorough, and I know very time-consuming. Next steps. I have put some things for your consideration. One of them is a letter of engagement that I got from Tim Norris. And so now that he's on board, I will sign it and make a copy for Pat. Or I can sign 3 of them, that way we don't have to make copies. I've got a bunch of them. And if you can give me his contact information, I will contact him after this meeting and see if I can set something up with him for Monday. I've asked Mary McCarthy to, when I meet with him, to join the meeting. So there are 2 people there for that. This is another letter, list of initial process items for investigation. So I will be the overall point of contact for the investigation, and I will provide him with my contact information. So the opening conversation will be as follows: defining the scope and purpose, identifying potential sources of information, identifying complaining witnesses, if any, estimated timeline of the investigation, protocols for updating the chair, what the results of the investigation should look like and how they will be delivered, and any additional questions and concerns identified by the chair and members of the committee. So one of the things I want to know is in terms of reporting out, and then if it is pertinent to report out at every meeting, or if he wants to do some work and then do a report out. So I want to get a sense of what the sequencing would be. I want to get a sense if anything that he has to do has to be kept confidential. I don't know. These are just questions that I have. How I keep folks updated. The starting point of this investigation is the discrepancy between what was in the police report and what our investigation shows. So I would expect that he would start there and ask questions about where to go next. Is that what he talked about when you guys talked with him, or how?
We spoke in very general terms.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, Elaine, you can add anything you'd like, but we spoke in very general terms. We really tried not to describe to him what a good starting point would be. We kind of posed the situation, and he kind of gave his...
Well, that's the essential question that we're starting with, and as you know, you start with one and it can go in a lot of different directions. So we'll just see what comes up.
He had said in his interview he would create a list of a number of witnesses to start with and then branch out from there, and he would start with the people that have the most information.
Okay.
Either those making the complaints if they're available, because there's some questions about employees of the school district can be made to be part of an interview, but a private citizen can't. They can be requested, but they don't have to comply, and then work from there.
Okay. So he is going to require documents that we have. We can get them through central office. Our policies as listed there. Any relevant contracts, if potential targets of the investigation are identified and have employment agreements or are subject to collective bargaining agreements. Points of contact within the school district for help setting up meetings, etc. And I have asked Brooke if Pat Maroney would be able to do that, because I know that Anne Marie and Todd were involved in some of the conversations in the internal investigation. And then a plan for arranging private locations for witness interviews, and so Pat and I can coordinate that. The other thing that I'm drawing a blank because I asked him about something else. I should have written it down. My goodness, I'm sorry.
Start date?
And we have to
Start date?
I'll have to ask him. I'm going to see if we can start on Monday.
I was wondering if that was what you...
No, it's, I'll be folding laundry and I'll go, there it is. Yeah, Leah.
Maybe this will jog your memory a little bit. So A, do we have access to the internal investigation, or is that
No.
under personnel protection?
We don't have it. I would say that initially that is a personnel issue. So,
He will be able to use that in his
yes, this is
investigation?
yes.
And so that therefore will eventually become known to us?
Don't know. That's a question that I want to be able to ask him.
Got it. And then with regard, okay, so you have the private location. I also know that one of the chief concerns of the community is to make sure that this remains as impartial as possible. And whenever you say that the investigator will be interfacing with the central office, that probably piques a concern that because Brooke is in the central office. So what kind of safeguards do we have there? Not that I'm saying we need them necessarily,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
what safeguards will be in place to make sure that no conflict of interest would be perceived?
Because it's likely that Brooke will be a witness, and I'm the point of contact, not Brooke, and Pat is doing the arrangements and will do so with me. So it'll be between Pat and myself that are doing the those arrangements.
Great. And then I have one last question, I think, for
Sure.
now, and that is,
Sorry.
at our last meeting, we talked about how the investigator would give us a preliminary briefing of sorts where, if he came across information that might change our minds about the paid administrative leave for our superintendent, that would be kind of a part of that initial briefing, maybe after 5 hours or so of investigation. Remember we were talking about this? So I wonder if that could be a part of the protocol.
I want to ask him about it. I'm the point of contact. The information would go through me, but if there is a briefing, like we've had Mike Maccaro come and sit with us and give us updates, but that I can certainly ask him about that and see. Yeah, Steve.
I have a question. The briefings that he gives to us
Yes.
prior to issuing a final report, are those under executive privilege?
I don't know. That's what I can find out.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
I think that you also said this already, but just to be clear with the public, there is the potential for this report to remain confidential. Is that
I
right?
think that we have to, we have to allow for that potential. So I can't make any pronouncements now. What I'm comfortable saying is that we hired Tim Norris, and that the investigation was triggered by this discrepancy in information. Those are two things I know to be true. And everything else, that's why we have an attorney working with us to guide us through. And I want to be able to share with you folks whatever I can, but I'm taking direction from him. And then if there's a point at which he needs to brief the whole committee, then that is what I'll find out too. So I don't know. I would imagine that some things are confidential relative to personnel. I don't know the disposition of the case as it stands right now and how that would impact our ability to report things. So, yeah. Okay? But I think that, well, I don't want to say it, but what I'm hoping is that by Wednesday, I'll be able to share information about the scope. But I'll know more after I speak with him. Mike?
So with regards to the scope, is that the special privilege of the chair? And if so, will you be soliciting input or feedback from the rest of the committee?
It's not my job to direct the scope, it's to communicate it. And we're working with a professional. I want to know what, in his professional opinion, once he gets started, what he sees. I want to keep it focused. I'm concerned about some of the things that I'm hearing outside of the committee that think other things about an investigation of different people or bringing in the public or students or something. I don't know where that idea came from, but right now it's focused on looking at the work that was done here, starting in June with a particular situation and finding out why our information says one thing, but another piece of information was later reported.
So then, to be clear, then the scope is going to be largely determined by our attorney after sort of an initial inquiry into that focused question?
I think so, and I don't know. I want to see where it goes, and it's like, you're looking into something and you find something else. But this isn't, it's not a big district-wide investigation. We're investigating a practice, something that was done in this district, and whether something or not something was missed. So that's what we have to find out. But as an attorney, he knows the questions to ask. I'm assuming that he'd have follow-up questions, but it's not me directing. I mean, I'm the point person, but if he has a trajectory for it and I'm able to present that to you guys, which we'll see if I can, that's what we'll look at. But we're not going off on tangents that we don't need to go on unless he sees something and says, I think we need to look at something. So, all right? Yes.
Can you ask him, because you wouldn't have this information right now, but we had discussed a phased approach to things in terms of policies and procedures and manuals, and even to some degree training of once these core questions are answered, if he sees other things that we might need to be updated.
Oh, so recommendations at the end.
Yeah, how how that would look.
Okay,
like
so
how would that work?
Recommendations for moving forward. So, for example, if there were incidents of racist graffiti in our schools, and it repeated itself, someone would come in, do an assessment, and recommend training or updating in policies. So that's akin to what you're saying.
Right. I'm assuming he's going to need to look at all of those things as part
That's
of the
what he
initial
asked for, yes.
as part of the initial investigation. So
Exactly.
It would be good to get his take on when we would broach the topic of reviewing policies, and like, do we do that at the very end? Do we do it as part of the overall process? Just sort of
hang on.
the operational aspect of that.
Mike?
I just want to make sure, as a way to clarify, Mr. Norris spoke of the procedures and structures that may or may not have been in place that allowed for this to unfold the way that it did. Is that what you're referring to, Elaine?
Yes, thank you. I did not articulate what I was saying very well, but I knew it in my head.
See, in his mind, that's, in absence of that, things go wrong, or you're following it and maybe it needs to be updated or something, but that's a good way to capture it on structures in place. Yes.
And attorneys were very clear, multiple attorneys, Tim included, that they are good at saying, you might want to look at this is not up to best practice or something of that
Yes.
nature, as
Yep.
opposed to saying, my recommendation is your policy should say this.
Yes. No, they very rarely tell you what to do. They give you
Yeah.
options for choosing. Okay. Anything else? Oh, Steve.
I would like to get it clear in my mind that the investigation we're asking him to do were the procedures or the legal requirements upon reporters followed, and do our policies and procedures mesh with those requirements? And did anyone, from an administrative point of view, either delay or
Misrepresent?
not misrepresent, but delay or look at the requirements as not necessarily as important, and therefore brush them off? And that's really what we're looking at, is it not? I mean, we're trying to determine whether certain individuals follow the process that the law sets down, and within the timeframes that the law sets down, and if not, why not?
I'm going to go back to the question. Why is there a difference between what our report showed and what is in the police report?
Fine.
But I think I would be very surprised if what you mentioned isn't part of the thinking, just as procedures and structures.
I mean, it's nothing more than that. We're not going back 25 years or 20
God,
years.
no.
Or anything. We're going back to June.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay?
I think we're going back to the initial,
Right.
whatever
Incident.
it was.
Or the initial
investigation, internal
kickoff point,
investigation.
yeah.
Okay, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Joe.
I just had a quick clarification.
Sure.
Just so I understand, I think I do. You keep mentioning the fact that the initial scope of the inquiry is going to be determine whether or not, or determine the issues attendant to the purported discrepancy between what the district was aware of versus what, and you keep saying police report. I want to be clear about this. We're not talking about a police report. We're talking about the affidavit.
Okay, I thought they were synonymous, but no.
Well, they're not, but I just wanted to be clear. Because
Okay.
you said you're saying there's a separate police report.
Right.
I haven't seen that.
Okay.
So I have seen the affidavit.
All right, so
I
I'm
just wanted to
using
make
the
sure.
wrong word.
No,
Yeah.
no.
It's fair.
No, I just want to be clear.
No, that's why I was asking. I just wanted to be clear. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. All right, yes, Leah.
You have a question about timeline. Is that going to include the duration or the number of hours?
Don't know.
So I would love to understand costs sooner than later.
Okay, well, the cost is in there. It's
$220 an hour?
$220 an hour, and we'll get a sense of what it is. I think once he knows who the people are that he needs to speak with, then he can get a better sense of that.
Great.
Okay? And I just know who he should start with, but in speaking with other people, he may find other people to talk to. Okay? Joe?
Can I just make one last point? It's more
You
for
can
my,
make as
more for
many
my
points
colleagues
as you
from
want.
SCO.
Yes.
I think if you have an opportunity to read the engagement letter, pay particular attention to the second to last paragraph. That pretty much spells it all with regards to scope of retention and the cost attendant thereto. So,
Isn't that per hour though, Joe?
well, the point is that as the engagement letter says, that it's sort of an at-will arrangement. So if there's any dissatisfaction that with regards to the performance, we can discharge them immediately. And if it goes that we're not paying our bills, he can discharge us immediately. So.
Yes.
If I can just add, I believe one of the things he said was that he would not treat this as an open-ended, take as much time as you want. I think the metaphor he used was, this is not, here are the keys to the car, bring it back when you're done. I think one of the reasons why we felt so comfortable with him is because he was very respectful of not just the sensitivity of the investigation, but, you know, of the timeline
Absolutely.
considerations.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good to know.
Can I just make one last point?
Of course.
Just remember, and again, for the members that may not engage council that often, he works for us, not
Yes.
the other way around.
He works for the school committee, and I'm the point person for the
Right,
school
right.
committee.
So
Yes.
the point being
Yes.
is that, you know, just to follow up what Mr. Horace said, you know, this is not an open-ended arrangement, and we control the cost, we control the scope of the, not the scope of the, but the engagement itself. If we're not satisfied, we can move on to
Yep.
someone else. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Is this to be discussed, followed up on at the next meeting, you said?
I want to find out from him what I can report. Mike, do you have his cell
I
phone
can
and
share that
contact?
with you, yeah.
Yeah, that would be good, because I'll call him tonight, see if Mary and I can meet with him on Monday and start to get the ball rolling. We have the letter of engagement. I signed it. I'll sign another one to give to Pat, and we can send one off to Mr. Norris and go from there. Are we good? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Kath.